Hi, welcome to season 7. We're in episode 6 of what we're calling the dark side of marketing. And the reason we wanted to do this, and we actually are enjoying it because there's so much to learn from things that seem like they're not so up and up. But when you really look into them more, there's elements of great marketing. And that's what we're doing is kind of looking at the bright side of darkness. I'm Mary Abazia, and with me is Tom Spitali and Sean Wellham.
Hi, special shout out to all our listeners in India. And sorry about this. If you're watching us, I can't do anything about that shadow today on my forehead. I'm okay.
Yeah, it's cloudy in Florida. Poor guys. So we are going to focus today on sugar. And Sean, what's wrong with sugar, or what's so dark about something so yummy?
Well, sugar is a product that's grown enormously. I think everybody's aware of the amount of sugar that we eat. It has grown hugely over the last 100 years, and many sources, many authorities think this is bad for us, whether it's obesity or tooth decay or the increase in diabetes. Essentially, sugar is a bit of a bad guy. And what I'm going to refer to is an article that the Journal of the American Medical Association published about 4 years ago now, and they were reviewing all of the evidence around the marketing and promotion of sugar, and came to the conclusion that the American Sugar Foundation, I think, or the Sugar Research Foundation, not only suppressed some information that may suggest sugar was bad for you, or at least didn't promote it or downplayed it, I think was the term they used. They also promoted the idea that the real bad guy was fat. And for those of us of a certain age, we'll know that through the 80s and 90s, fat was the bad guy. Everything was low fat, this, cut down on your fat, cholesterol, and all the rest of it. Very much the focus. Sugar got a little bit of a pass. It wasn't really a focus area. And what's interesting about that is it wasn't unknown. It's not as if we just came to realize that sugar had some negative health effects. There was a book written in 1972 called Pure, White, and Deadly. And the opening line, or the opening paragraph, the author said, "I hope by the time you've read this book, you will understand that sugar is dangerous." And this was a scientist. This was not some random conspiracy theorist. Although his ideas were essentially ignored or downplayed because they didn't get any traction. And the reason, and this is the part of the dark side of marketing that I want to dig into, is that the sugar lobby, whether that's the Sugar Research Foundation or other trade bodies, did a very good job of creating credible evidence to key influencers, thereby taking the pressure off any further scrutiny of their own product or methods. They did a good job of both downplaying the risks of sugar, and in a marketing sense, in a moment of genius, they managed to develop a bad guy in terms of fat. Fat is the one you should be looking at, which gave them a bit of a pass. So in terms of the dark side, they used influencers. They paid for research, they commissioned research that supported their cause. They provided this information to key government departments and other influential bodies, and operated under that umbrella of a general opinion around sugar. What we've seen happen in what we want to take back, if you like, and what we've seen work in a more ethical way, is to use that power of influencers to help create a more conducive environment for your own product or service, to match what the sugar lobby did with a slightly more positive spin, a more ethical approach to getting your products. So you guys think of examples of that, or ideas around how influence works on the good side of the ledger?
It sounds like a cousin of the cigarette world.
Yeah, right.
But, Tom, what do you think?
First of all, I'm a little bit angry because I love sugar. I guess that's terrible sweet tooth, and so I'm mad at these guys that they did this. The other thing is that of the three of us, Sean, would you agree Mary's the fittest of the three of us?
Without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah. She doesn't eat much sugar. In fact, Mary, do you remember what I told you when you told me you didn't like cake?
Oh,
Told me
there's
about,
something wrong. I think there's something wrong with me.
I just said I can't trust anybody that doesn't like cake. So Mary doesn't like cake. So anyway,
No.
um,
And my husband works for the sugar industry, ironically.
well, okay. I didn't know if you wanted to reveal that or not. There's a lot to unpack here. Okay.
Well,
So
we're going to create a domestic incident at this.
yeah.
We need to tread carefully.
I think the first thing that I want to bring out, I don't know if I necessarily, I'm going to talk a little more general. Sean, you asked for stories. Let's just talk a little bit more general first.
Okay.
Let me ask a question. Is there such thing as a fat lobby? There's a sugar lobby. Is there a fat lobby? There's not, right? I mean, it's just too general. It's not really necessarily because
No, you would find though, Tom, there would be not fat per se, but there'd be a dairy lobby. There'd be a lobby for, the cheese industry and the milks and creams, say, trying to put their case. So there would be a counterpoint. But you're right.
a bit, even actually a multiple coalition if they want. The problem is fat got positioned, and we've always said don't let the competition position you. It's never a good thing. You have to be proactive. And so what happened to fat is that sugar pointed at them and nobody was sticking up for fat. So people started, staying away from fat. As Sean said, I remember all throughout the 80s and 90s, all the craze of the low and no fat, stuff. And it's actually, there's a lot of great things for that fat gives you, including your, it helps your brain, it helps you think. But that is a terrible name. First of all, the connotation is terrible. So that would have been the first challenge. But that's what strikes me is that you can't let, if you're out there marketing a B2B product and you're not being proactive about positioning yourself and you let the competition do it, it's not a good thing. Don't let that happen.
Well, you think about it, so you make a good point about the name. It's got a bad name, you said, but really it's just a name, the same as protein or carbohydrate or fiber or any other aspect of describing things that we eat or constituents of what we eat. But you're right, it is, you said yourself, it's bad, but it's only bad because it was originally just a descriptive word. And then it becomes this bad by association with its cause and effect, if you like.
Well, it reminds me of going down this alley is the prune board, in California, that was called the prune board and sold prunes. And then one day they realized no one wants to admit that they eat prunes. They might, but they don't want to admit it. But there's a lot of very healthy benefits to it. And once they started calling it the plum, there all of a sudden it was like, oh, I'm going to have plums on my lamb and roast. All of a sudden it was a gourmet thing. It just completely, what's in a name is huge. Which is all about the power positioning. But it took them another several years to call themselves the Plum Board and not the Prune Board. But once they did, I think they got a little more respect. So yeah, there is a lot in positioning, not only for yourself, but what you're calling your products and your category. Even you can just reframe your whole category if you need to, and all of a sudden people start thinking about you completely different.
Yeah, that's what all the fat people should have done. The dairies, the cheeses, not the fat people, but
they're doing it to a large extent, well, to some extent, because now we're all familiar with omega-3 and fatty acids, and those are good things for heart health. So you see things that still by definition are high in fat, but they'll be sold as a good source of omega-3, for example. So people are following that prune, plum sort of name changing because it's really hard to change a position that someone's given you without repositioning yourself, and that invariably means a different name.
Yeah, I want to go down the other alley, if you will, of the influencers. I thought that was a really good point that you made, Sean, is that you can call yourself, or you can do a lot of positioning, but if you aren't whispering in the right ears, if you aren't looking at that influencer map and seeing the power, maybe even there's power in what it is today, but also seeing how things shift. We're going through this crazy pandemic, and all of those influencer maps have shifted. So companies that are selling medical devices, as an example, have shifted some of their efforts over to selling to governments directly, because they know that that's where the pot of money is, as opposed to in just the hospitals. And they're getting a lot of traction doing that. But that's because they looked at the influencer map and figured out where they should put more of their efforts and different efforts. You know, your salespeople don't necessarily call on the government.
You know, I heard it on medical devices. You reminded me of an interesting story. This was about a pretty advanced scanning device. Portability was at its core, and it had some limited functionality, but it meant that you didn't always have to send a patient to an MRI scanner, which, as you know, is a fairly big piece of kit. It could do some rudimentary work remotely and locally. And they tried, initially, the marketing plan was to go to the top physicians in their field and obviously get them to use it, because you would assume they'd be strong influencers, you know, the top orthopedic surgeons and what have you. And while that was somewhat successful, they realized that the group that had the most influence were those that were working in teaching hospitals. For obvious reasons, when you think about it, they are going to be using this device and being seen with this device by the young, impressionable, recently graduated new medics that are now learning their trade. And as we know, what you see and get familiar with early on tends to stick around. We tend to be comfortable. So the idea of doing the influencer map and saying, yeah, these people have some influence, these senior doctors, but it's the ones that are teaching in the hospitals that have a massive influence, much bigger than their total demand for the product, because there's relatively few of them in terms of the overall physician population. I always thought that was a pretty smart way to do the influencer and say, wow, these people actually have the influence. So let's get them the product and see what happens. And sales grew.
You could even go beyond that. I mean, we've done a fair amount of work with companies that are building their influencing plan. And it's always an interesting debate, not just about, you know, finding the doctors in the teaching hospitals, but do you invest in the students, because they're eventually going to have their own practice. And so do you have a way to maybe kind of focus on the students and establish communications about your products with the students, so that when they go into their own practice, they have experience with your product or service, and now you maybe have them for life, or as long as you stay relevant.
That was actually, Tom, that was the two-pronged strategy. They identified the teachers, if you like, as the influencers,
yep,
and the young medics who were acquiring their own equipment and starting, as you say, to buy things. Yep. That was defined as the customer segment group, was right. Newly qualified medics, mm-hmm. and the influencers were teachers at the hospital. So it was a nice synergistic little tie-up between customer segmentation, albeit more of a classification, I guess, but nevertheless, they targeted a relatively small group and used an influence strategy with the people that they would be taking their instruction from.
Wow. My favorite influence story is, you know, this works at any scale. It works with, you know, we're talking about products, we're talking about markets, but also companies. And, you know, our GE, when they expanded into Europe, went to, of course, London, because they spoke English there. So it'd be easier when they first expanded, you know, globally. And they were trying to get a lot of legislature through and acquire different companies, and they kept getting shut down. And it was because they were not near the power base where all the decisions were being made. So once they packed up and they moved themselves to Brussels, and they are actually in the same corridor, you know, they can look in on the other offices, they can look down on the regulators' offices, and they go down, they have beer, they have coffee together, and they were able to get a lot more through. It's because they physically even put themselves where those main decision makers were. So they really did understand the power of an influence map.
It's funny you mentioned that, Mary, because I used to work for GE, as you know, and I've been to that office, our Brussels office, as we called it, and it is literally facing the European Parliament building. It is literally on the same square. You look out the window and there's the magnificent European Parliament building. And it was one of those situations that I'm always reminded of, because we're currently going through the final days of the Brexit negotiations right now. That's the big topic. And invariably, the Parliament building is on every single news bulletin with somebody standing in front of it. And I am now becoming very boring by saying, oh, that's GE's office behind them. It is literally that close. But you're right, that proximity is another key element in influence. It's not just having the message, not just having the position and the name. often it's about having that proximity or at least frequency. It's no good just to try and do these things once. You've got to get close to the influencers if you really want to leverage that power. I guess that's the key point there.
Yeah.
Mary, do we have time to unpack one more thing about all this? Because we've talked
one
about
quickly, yes,
right,
absolutely.
we talk about influencers and positioning. This is another topic that we talked about this season: trust. Okay, we talked about it when we were talking about the social dilemma. Might have been last season. They're blending together, but trust, and how trust is so difficult these days because there's so many people out there that are doing what the sugar lobby did, and that is really espousing things that weren't true to try to and effectively doing so. And you see a lot of that going on in social media today, you know. And so for our clients, B2B marketers, what do you do about it? How do you get people to believe you? I get, you know, that's probably could be a whole range of strategies, but one of the things you've got to do is you've got to be be fair and balanced. You know, try to present both sides of an argument if you can, even if one side of the argument makes your point better than the other, because there is so much mistrust right now. You know, if the fat lobby would have came out with a competing message, would they have been believed? You know, since the sugar lobby beat them to it way back when. You know, it's just a whole other topic of trust.
And I think on that, Tom, trust is the old saying, trust is earned, not deserved or given. You know, you have to earn it. And also trust is based on actions rather than statements of intent. And what's interesting, you use the term fair and balanced. Isn't that Fox News's slogan? Yeah. I mean, that's the ultimate saying, if you want to believe someone who's fair and balanced, do not listen to the fact that they tell you they're fair and balanced, because chances are they're not. It's almost as if the more you claim neutrality or trustworthiness or some degree of objectivity, the more you have to claim it, the less likely it is that you possess it. And it really is one of those things, when we talk about strategy being a long-term thing, long-term actions and demonstrable moves that you make are the key, because when you get caught out once, the counter goes back to zero. It slowly creeps up to that level of trust, but break that covenant of trust and it falls back. You don't knock 5% off your trust, you fall all the way back. It's probably one of the most important critical capabilities that most businesses need, is to maintain that trust level, which is probably a whole new topic of conversation.
Yeah, and then you open the brand door with that as well.
Exactly right. Yeah, they're all connected. Everything's connected, right?
Everything's connected. Any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
No, I will declare a love for sugar myself. So I just want to be on Tom's side of the equation here. Show me a cake, it won't be there for long. That's what I'm saying. Other than that, nothing to add.
So you can be trusted.
According to the Tom scale of trust, that makes me trustworthy. Oh, no, likable, I think he said, not trustworthy.
Oh, I like Mary.
Maybe it was trust. I forget.
I actually trust Mary now, even though she doesn't like cake. But this was early in.
Oh, you just don't like her. I'm sorry, Tom. I misunderstood.
I do like Mary, and I trust Mary. But I had a little problem with Mary trust early in the beginning because she didn't like cake. And I've just found that people don't like cake for the most part. They're not really human. But Mary's proven she's got.
I'm glad you managed to work your issues out, the pair of you. I'm really pleased. Now we've got to concentrate on Mary working out her issues back home. Now she's been discussing the sugar lobby. But
yeah, boy, I'm going to end this baby now. So thank you very much for listening. We hope that you have at least one thing to weigh in on, no pun intended, as you listen to this, and hopefully give us some of your feedback. You can hear all of our podcasts if you're in India or on our Accidental Marketer website, and then also anywhere you get your podcast. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Sorry, Tim Abazia.